Hello and welcome, people. This is Kushi, and you're listening to Goonj, a podcast from the students of TIS Guwahati. We are back with a new episode, and today we have a very inspiring individual with us. She is the founder of the NGO, the Indian Women's Project, which comes under the umbrella organization of the Indian Gender Project, aiming at raising awareness about gender, sexuality, and intersectionality amongst Indian youth. They are also a partner initiative of Indian Queer Project. She has also been working as a story editor for Menstrual. Without further ado, let's introduce our guest for today, Miss Divya Rosaline David. Welcome, Divya. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Divya, can you briefly introduce yourself to our listeners so that we can get to know you better?
Okay, so I've basically been really passionate about, ambitiously dismantling the patriarchy in India, but mostly I've been working in the field of women's rights and women's raising awareness about gender disparities in India, and a lot of my work has centered around that. I worked with Menstrupedia as their story editor, and when I was doing my master's at Oxford, there was something that I realized. I realized that the stories of marginalized Indian women was simply not recorded. That there was absolutely no no record, no documentation of the stories of Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi women. And that's when I started to think and really like ruminate about how I could best go about it. And that's when I came up with the idea of creating an oral history archive, which is a crowdsourced archive of marginalized Indian women's stories. We have interns across the country interviewing different women and ensuring that their stories kind of enter the, enter dominant history. So that's really what I've been doing, and that's been my life's work.
Honestly, it was very wonderful to hear about your initiative. And of course, as social science students, when we enter college, also, what we realize is the dialogue over intersectionality of social issues is very much ignored in the mainstream discussions, even when it comes from mainstream actors who are talking about ideas such as poverty, such as women's rights. All these ideas, when they come forward, they ignore the intersectionality that comes with the idea of class, caste, and sexuality. So projects like yours really give the much needed space for people whose voices are ignored. So can you tell us something about the people working for your organization? Is it mostly volunteer work, or is it like, do you have a team that is working for you?
So pretty much our entire organization is volunteer driven. All of us are kind of doing this on the side, or if we're not doing it on the side and we're doing it full time, we're doing it for free. So it's very volunteer driven. It's a completely our entire NGO has been strengthened by people who, for a lot of people, when they join an organization that works with gender, that works in, in the field of, um, you know, well, patriarchal dismantling, that for a lot of people this is personal, right? You don't join um, because you haven't gone through something. You join because you know what it's like. So we've been completely volunteer driven. We have people from all over the country, interns and students and young people from all over the country who care deeply about this project, who've been going into villages, going into different areas across the country, just taking interviews and gathering stories so that we can literally try to rewrite history.
Uh, all I can say at this point is like you guys are doing an amazing job. Because I for while preparing for this interview, I did my look up something over Facebook. So I couldn't look much into it because I don't have a Facebook account, and Facebook kind of limits how much you can look into it if you don't have your own account. Yeah, so but I went through whatever I could at the first glance, and like I read through it, and all the stories that I could see, it was so motivating and it was so encouraging to see that something like this is working in India, is like functioning in India. um you know and all of us at Gunj, honestly, we applaud you for your initiative, not just you, but also your team for like coming up and working on this. And what
Thank
I want
you.
to know
Thank
is
you.
like, yeah. So what I want to know is this, like, can you like give any, you know, incident or something that sparked of this, idea within you that you want to work towards this, or something that drove you towards this journey on life, I would say.
Yeah, I think I mean, I kind of briefly touched upon it when I was, introducing myself. But when I was doing my master's, I was trying to focus on menstrual anthropology and Dalit feminist theology, which were the two, main areas of my research interest. So menstrual anthropology was kind of trying to look into, how menstruation and menstrual taboos are experienced by urban and rural women in contemporary India. And Dalit feminist theology is, it concerns how I'm a Christian. I identify as a Christian person. So um, Dalit feminist theology really focuses on how Dalit Christian women have navigated, the idea of being Christian, but also the idea of being, from, lower caste. So I thought, hey, you know what? This should be fairly, easy to research. And of course, I was quite naive in thinking that, because when I started writing my papers, I realized that there was absolutely no account, like zero account of the stories, the experiences, and the anthropological literature that you just would imagine that we have a repository of, but we don't. And so that's when I realized that, you know what, I think we need to create some sort of a, either an archive or a library of marginalized women's experiences. Because if I, as a researcher, cannot find, experiences, and if I cannot find literature that draws from the direct lived experiences of women, that don't speak for women, but that provide a platform for them to speak for themselves, then if that doesn't exist, then I would have to do something about it. And so I thought about this for a really long time, and then in 2019, I kind of approached Ambedkar University's Gender Studies department, and I said, you know what, I've been thinking about this. Is there something that we can do together? And at the time, the department was more than glad to have some of the students kind of intern with me. And we started gathering the stories of women across India. But, I mean, it was also the time when I was close to getting married, and I was kind of busy with a lot of personal work. But in 2021, I I revamped the entire, the website. I revamped our entire approach, because there was something about the pandemic that kind of struck me, because the pandemic disproportionately affected marginalized women. And that was when I realized that, you know what, it is the voices of marginalized women that is going to get inevitably lost historically, at a time such as this, at an inflection point in our country's history. And if we don't kind of pull up our socks and start to document and record these histories as soon as possible, then we would have lost some very critical information, both about women's lived experiences, but also about what was happening, at the margins in today's day, place, and time. So that's really kind of been my journey with the archive. And of course, once we started getting more and more people involved and coming on board, we realized also that a lot of the people, a lot of the interns who were joining us were, they identified as queer. And so they kind of formed their own queer exclusive safe space. Again, this is an offshoot of, the pandemic's trauma, right? Because so many queer youth across India were suddenly finding themselves in cis het patriarchal spaces, where they couldn't be themselves, or where they had to hide and not find solidarity among their communities from. And so this virtual group of interns suddenly found home with each other. And so they formed the Indian Queer Project, which is also, again, India's first queer archive for Indian youth. Um, so it's been an interesting, journey, because what just started as an archive has now suddenly become, a movement. Like literally within 2 months, we're about 50 to 60 people strong, and we have people from all over the country of all kinds of gender and sexual identities, from different castes, um, different cities, different towns. And it's just been really humbling and also very encouraging to see that people really care about this. They care about the voices of people being heard. They care about talking about gender and sexuality, because quite frankly, at this point, I think everyone's had enough, and the pandemic has, shown us the cracks, even more so than before. So yeah, this is where we're at now.
It was like, I mean, as you just told about your story, only thing like I could think of is this line. You might have heard of this before. It's, I don't know where exactly it's from, but it says that ask not what country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So you're like, ask not what society has done for you, but what you can do for your society. And it's like really inspiring. Like, you know, as students, like when we see that someone who was, you know, working or who was a student themselves, and they came across that, okay, so this is missing and this should be there. And from there, the journey, as you've described, it's just like, if it's just like, if you can do it, then all of us should also come up and, do something. Because again, the society has given us some things, and but the others, there are others in society who've not got it. And like, as human beings, we should, like, step up and make sure that everybody can get equal opportunities. And it's just amazing to hear about your journey. So I
Thank you.
actually yeah, so I was going to ask, like, since you guys started out in 2020, right? Amongst so I what I wanted to ask was that, did you start before like the COVID thing happened, or in between the COVID situation?
Oh, I mean, we started gathering stories with Ambedkar University in 2019, but we hadn't really kind of registered and kickstarted in this format until May 2021. And also, just to kind of add to your previous statement, I think it's easy, I think, for a lot of us to, um, you know, not uh, remember and realize the fact that, we all come from places of a lot of privilege. Like the fact that we know English means that we have some degree of agency to, to navigate the world in a much more convenient way than other people. So, every single person who's been part of the Indian Women's Project, the Indian Gender Project, and the Indian Queer Project, most of us are people from places of privilege, both in terms of our caste position, and our educational status, our class position, and all of that. So, to be honest, this is almost, at least the way I see it, is really not. Um, I really don't feel like, oh, we're doing something good, or I don't have like those romantic ideas of the work that we're doing. I see it more as something that has to be done, and that cannot be done by people who are so busy struggling to survive, that they cannot be doing the work and the labor, and they shouldn't be doing the labor of also documenting their history. So, and we people like you and I, we benefit from that very system that oppresses marginalized women. And it's just important to acknowledge these things, you know. Maybe we will never do enough right by them in our lifetimes, but it's important to acknowledge that and just be aware of that.
Um, those those are like very hard hitting words, Divya. Like, I think, yeah, I think you would have like inspired a lot of our listeners to just rethink the idea of privilege and how we can use it to benefit others at the end of the day. And what I want to ask from here on is like, with all the like whatever times you had, like setting up this, first of all, looking for this, uh, narrative, and then trying to set up a platform for this narrative. What is, if you there's some kind of lesson or some kind of message that you got from this journey through whatever you have already done with your organization, if there's some kind of message that you would uh, you know want to spread across the Indian youth.
I think a lot of people get very caught up in what other people think. So for a long time, I felt like, you know, even I was kind of caught up in that rut where I was like, oh, but you know, I'm a person from a privileged position, and here I am documenting the stories of marginalized women. Is this right? Is this wrong? And I kind of got caught up in, you know, my own kind of ideological loopholes. I mean, sorry, ideological, concerns. And I think someone just told me, a friend told me, they were like, you know what, stop worrying about what other people think. Uh, because if you don't do the work because of XYZ reason, then that work will never get done. So you may as well as do it, even if you face flack for it. And I think that's just something that I've, you know, kind of reconciled myself with. I understand that, you know, some of the work that we do might offend a lot of people's sentiments. We have received criticism in the past, and I expect that we will receive criticism in the future for the ways in which we go about doing things. But the truth is that at least now we know that there is an oral history archive for the voices of marginalized people, which wasn't there before. And so, you know, 10,000 years, okay, well, not 10,000 years, that's a stretch, but say 100 years from now, if somebody's trying to research or, you know, understand Indian society's history better, at least they would have that kind of access to information. And this time, unlike before, where it was mostly men's voices that were documented, preserved, and passed on, it'll also be the voices of, you know, marginalized women. It'll also be the voices of queer youth. So I guess that's my biggest lesson, that you shouldn't think too much about what other people think. You believe in something, you just go for it, you just do it. You know, there's no point of thinking, dreaming, planning, and looking at the stars and saying, oh, I wish India would change. Just do a little bit, you know. I mean, you can't pick all the battles, and you can't right all of societal wrongs, but you can definitely um, start by doing something small, and then, you know, see where that takes you from there.
Again, like, I can really relate to what you're saying here. The fact that speaking up for something that you're not related to yourself, that is not really with as a part of you, and you feel like you might be like speaking over the actual person, but at least like you have provided a way of documenting it. So again, this is like, I just really don't know what to say other than brilliant, other than heartwarming, other than just a wonderful initiative, not just as a part of collecting history, as a part of gathering knowledge, but also empowering people and empowering their voices.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would I don't know if I'm empowering people's voices, but the one thing that I can tell you that we are doing differently is that a lot of platforms document the stories of marginalized people. But what we try to do is we try to just we're only people who record. We don't speak for them. We document the stories and we store their stories. So we're just like a medium of, and we transcribe their stories. So we're just a medium of documentation and the preservation of their stories, but we don't necessarily write stories on their behalf or interpret their story based on what they've said, or how we think they've said what they've said. So that's just something we're trying to do. Um, about empowering, I don't quite know if it's like entirely empowering, but I do know that the act of interviewer and interviewee interacting with each other, sharing a vulnerable, literally people are sharing their lives, right, with each other. That relationship, that act, that point of communication is extremely, from what I've, you know, been told and from what I've experienced, that act is extremely, there's something very political about that moment because it's usually someone from outside of, from an upper class background in most cases, interacting with someone from a marginalized community. And when those two people meet, there's a sense of community, there's a sense of, hey, you know what, we're all, there's like this oneness that is created. And I think that's where true change lies, because I know some of our interns who've gone and done these interviews. They've stayed in touch with these ladies. They've wished them on Onam and Eid, and they've really just become friends. And I think that's just something that's really been lacking in India, where we talk about wanting to create social change, but every time I start with the training of interns, the first question they always ask is, "Wait, how am I going to find people to interview?" And my question to that always is, "Wait, so you're telling me you don't already have friends from outside of your comfort zone, outside of your community, outside of your caste and class boundaries, in spite of the fact that you care about, or you think you care about, social change?" And that's where the reflection begins. That's where change happens. So yeah, I mean, that's where we're at right now.
Okay, so what I want to know from here is, um, what was the reaction of the women whom you were like, interviewing in this process, like when you are getting the stories from them?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are like, who wants to hear my story? Why my story? So sometimes you just have to be like, no, your story matters. Your story is important. So a lot of reactions are like that. But then once they're in front of the camera and we start interviewing them and we start asking questions, they start to enjoy it. I mean, inevitably what happens is that once the interview is done, they'll always want to see their published picture. They'll want to like see the video, and it's very exciting because, I mean, until that point, people probably wouldn't have even asked them about their story or what they thought or what advice they had for other women. And suddenly there's someone asking them about it. So it's quite exciting for, at least I hope it's quite exciting for most women who get interviewed. And another thing is that many times people don't think of their story as important. They don't think of the narrative as worthy of historical reckoning. But suddenly when they start speaking, and we start asking them questions about their life, um, about their families, about their thoughts, their dreams, their aspirations, suddenly that changes. They say, hey, actually, I didn't think my story was worth that much, but after the interview, they're like, oh, actually, we do have a pretty cool story. We have gone through a lot, and we have been resilient, and we have endured XYZ trauma, and so our story is a story of strength, and that becomes pretty beautiful. It's pretty beautiful, yeah.
I imagine it must be a beautiful experience for everybody who's involved in this. But what I want to know from here is like, of course, when you're starting something like this, it's not always necessary that you might have positive support from people, or like even society in general. So, what was your experience in this regard? Like, how did you get support? Did you get support from people at first, and like people around you, and how did they, react to this idea of wanting to set up a project like this?
I think, well, first of all, I think I might have an echo chamber of people who care about the same things that I do. But overall, the response has been pretty positive. But now that you're asking me this question, I really don't know if um, I spent too much time thinking about what everyone um, everyone thought about the project. I don't think I asked anyone what they thought. I just went ahead and did it. I did care about some people's opinions, people I think are important activists, or who had some kind of um, say in these kind of things, like Dalit Bahujan activists. I really cared about what they thought, and I asked a lot of them what they thought. But I didn't bother asking others. And I didn't care that much about what other people thought as much. So it's a good question. I should probably I should probably ask more people what they thought, because it's not something I really spend time thinking about. But um, we started in this current avatar. We started only in June, and right now we already have so many interns, and we actually got like 260 applications, and then we had to zero down on on a select few. So, and everyone who's been with us has just wants to stay long term, so I'm guessing we must be doing something right. But I Yes, it's a good question. Kushi.
I'm glad you think so, and I'm glad that you did not get into the thing of considering everybody's opinions, because sometimes that's the first thing that's going to detract you from setting on new journeys. So yeah,
Yeah.
and now moving on, what are your future aspirations for your organization? Like, what do you see in the future of your project?
I think as far as the Indian Women's Project is concerned, we have about 100 stories from across the country, from women from the Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi backgrounds, but we really have a long way to go in ensuring that as many women as possible are represented. So, for example, we don't have women's interviews from, say, Daman and Diu or Lakshadweep Islands. We don't have the stories of Parsi women, um, or certain sections of Muslim women still recorded, and that's something we're working on. And yeah, I mean, my hope is that we represent as many marginalized women's voices as possible in our documentation work. I also hope that at the Indian Gender Project level, we're planning on rolling out a sex ed curriculum that focuses. It's a little different from the usual sex ed curriculum, because we're also focusing on, talking about gender and sexual identities, um, and orientations. So we're looking into doing that, and we're planning on rolling that out across India. So that's something we're really excited about. But other than that, yeah, the queer archive and the Indian women's archive, we're really hoping that we can just expand to as many stories as possible, and to also increase our reach, so that more and more people you know interact with these stories, and hopefully get sensitized by these stories, and and get aroused to do something about the state of affairs in our country right now.
These are certainly some noble aspirations, I would say so. And of course, like the fact of like especially about the fact that you put out about sex ed in India, it's like negligible. People are not even taught properly what is going on, and that is how people get, people are easily made a victim of, because they do not even realize what is going on with them. So some bringing in especially the idea of sexuality and gender into this, i'm I'm pretty sure that this would help out a lot of people. So along with that, what I want to ask here is that since you have already like as already mentioned that your organization is like, along with recording it for the purpose of history and recording the voices of people, it is also with the motive of generating awareness amongst the youth. So what do you think? Like, I think you've already mentioned quite a bit about what the Indian youth can do, but what I would like to ask is, what do you think would be the progress of Indian youth? Like, people who are joining in, even though, like, you have a lot of people, but comparing to the state of India today, do you think that it is possible that a wider population would come in, maybe in 15 years, in 20 years, and work towards promoting equality in all aspects with the kind of background that most of Indian youth has, with kind of education that they are getting?
I think with every generation, there's always that one group of people who realize that what's happening is not right, and that's at every it I mean, it doesn't matter if you're educated or not, right? It matters how aware you are of your body, your the violence meted out on your body, how aware you are of how your lived experience is clearly not working in your favor. People know trauma when they're undergoing it, and after a while they even realize that what's happening with them is wrong. In it, hopefully in many cases they do, and I think with that comes this awareness that, hey, you know what, this is happening with me, but I don't want it to happen to somebody else. And that's usually where activism starts. Where you say, okay, this is like most people in our organization have gone through something extremely traumatic with regards to the patriarchy. Either they've been ostracized, or they've experienced sexual violence, and so a lot of people say, hey, you know what, this has happened to me, and I don't want this to happen to somebody else. And I think that's where people begin to say, okay, I need to do something about this. This cannot go on. Or they might see somebody, experience it, someone who they love, someone who they care for, and then you realize that, hey, actually I have to do something about this. I just can't sit and watch this violence and this trauma unfold again and again, throughout generations. And so every literally every generation has that group of people who say enough is enough. We're not going to just sit around and watch this happen. So I don't know if I would say education is everything. I would say that awareness is certainly important, but I don't know if education is the solution to it all. I do think that access to information, access to um, you know um, more information that's useful for people to make their own decisions with is more important than, for example, knowing the lyrics of Jana Gana Mana. You know what I'm saying? Like, you need to it depends on what kind of information is being received by people. But I do think that, frankly, it's the youth that really have a lot of hope bestowed on them. But it's also, I feel like it's so unfair, because it's like, oh, now, all our elders have messed up so phenomenally, and oh, we have to clean up the mess. So it's a bit unfair to, put everything on the youth to to labor towards. But I do think that young people often are the agents of change, and in India especially, a lot of a lot of young people are beginning to say, "This is not happening. This is not cool. This is not how I want to see my country and my people, um, regress, not progress." And I don't want to be a part of this conversation that marginalizes people. I don't want to be part of a society that doesn't, um, you know, um, cater to every single person's highest potential being realized. And this comes in particularly so in the case of caste. So until we dismantle caste, until the youth of our country say and work actively towards systemically dismantling caste, I don't know if we will ever see a day um, when the patriarchy will truly be dismantled, because it's not going to happen if caste structures remain in place, and it's definitely not going to happen uh, if uh, the people who belong to a higher caste hold on to those patriarchal structures that benefit them and that harm others. So it's going to have to start with talking about caste first, acknowledging that caste is a problem in our country, and then working towards, after that, you know, addressing all the patriarchal flaws and cracks in its edifice.
Very well said, Divya. And like, I agree with the fact what you have said, that more than education, it's awareness that is important, because you can have the best education or you could have no education, but if you have awareness, you will certainly feel it within your heart to make that change. So, what I want to ask is, can you give us a brief about how you choose interns for your project, and like how do people apply for it? How do you have a training process, selection process, so that if someone is like interested in joining, how should they approach you?
Oh, you can just, write to us on Instagram, or we have a website on all our social media. You can just click on the email button and you should be able to reach us just fine. We always need people. We do have an archive. We do have a sex ed curriculum team. We do have a queer archive as well, but that's only exclusively for people who are queer, for youth who are queer. Um, we're pretty approachable. You can just hit us up. We don't like doing these overly formal 1 month internships. We really focus on building community with the NGO. We have monthly meetups, um, and we work, leaders in the NGO work with individuals to kind of also ensure that their highest potential, their career paths are also catered to within the ambit of the NGO's work. So um, there's a lot of focus on community building. There's a lot of focus on individual progress. So we're looking for people who are really invested in this, really don't want to do this just because we'll be another name on your resume, which from what I've heard is pretty beneficial. But um, we're looking for people who really care about the cause. Everyone here is, honestly, they just care very deeply about it. So we're looking for people who come with a lot of heart and a lot of passion to the table, and that's really the only criteria. We've had people as young as 18-year-old school children to um, Oxford, Yale, and Cornell educated graduates supporting our work. So you could fit in anywhere on the spectrum, and um, it would be invaluable for us to have you join us.
I'm sure that many of our listeners would be happy to join such a brilliant initiative. And finally, like, we are coming towards the end of the interview. So, what I would like to ask is, do you have some kind of message for our listeners?
Um, I think my only message is that we as a society don't spend a lot of time in self reflection, and we don't meditate on how just the very lives that we lead are kind of playing into a bigger societal problem of which we are such an active part, and we don't realize it because sometimes when you have so much privilege, you don't realize the several thousands of ways in which you benefit from um, a system that works for you. And so I just urge everyone to challenge the system, to think about ways in which the system is unfair to so many people whose only fault it was to have just been born in the wrong place, in the wrong family, in the wrong time. And I just think that that's just if that unfairness doesn't move you to do something, absolutely anything, then we really need to revisit our morality, both as individuals and as a society. So it's just important to start thinking about our privilege, to start thinking about casteism in our country, and to start thinking about the ways in which a structure like that marginalizes the marginalized, especially women and especially queer people. And that's the work that we do, and that's the work that we hope that you too will be sensitized towards working for.
Thank you for such beautiful words, Divya. It was an honor to have you on our podcast. I truly enjoyed every moment so much so that like I really don't want this conversation to stop at all. But sadly, sadly, we are at the end for today's episode. And again, thank you so much, Divya, for being our guest today and sharing about yourself and your work and the three projects that you are working with. We wish that you and your organization will have all the success and all your aspirations can come true, right? And we would
Thank you,
urge all
Srishti.
our
Thank you.
listeners, yeah, we would urge all our listeners to check out Indian Women's Project on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And while you're at it, also please feel free to check us out on our Instagram at tis underscore goonj. If you like this interview, please follow us on Spotify so that you don't miss the next episode. You can also send us your feedback at podcastgoonj at gmail.com. Thank you for listening and have a great day.
Thank you.